They didn't fire me because I failed at my job. They fired me because I chose to protect my sister. That Friday morning, I got an email stamped mandatory attendance. It wasn't for a client meeting or a system launch. It was for the CEO's family celebration. A lavish party in Austin, all expense paid, branded as company culture. Attendance wasn't optional, they said. It was a test of loyalty. But my loyalty was already spoken for. My sister had called me the night before, voice trembling, telling me she couldn't face another night with her abusive husband alone. I promised I'd be there. Family first, always. When I replied that I wouldn't be attending the party, the response came fast and cold. By Monday, I was escorted out of the office, security at my side, a cardboard box in my hands. My years of work, the backbone of their entire system, erased with a single sentence: "You're not family." That phrase cut deeper than the termination, because I was family, the one who stayed up past midnight keeping servers alive, the one who trained new hires, the one who fixed the mistakes no one else even noticed. And yet, the moment I chose blood over politics, they decided I was disposable. I still remember the silence in that room, the way my heart pounded, and the strange calm in knowing something they didn't. The system they thought they controlled no longer trusted them. Before I share how everything unraveled after that, where are you tuning in from right now? And tell me, have you ever been treated like you were invisible at work? Drop a comment below if this story stirs something in you. Who knows, your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Austin was buzzing that weekend. Billboards downtown lit up with the company logo next to the CEO's grinning face announcing his Family First Summit. It was supposed to be a retreat, but in reality, it was more like a coronation. Every department head was told to show up dressed to impress, ready to smile for photos. I remember walking past the email again, the one marked in red: "Attendance is not optional." They booked an entire resort just outside the city, chandeliers imported from Europe, chefs flown in from New York. It wasn't about celebrating our work, it was about celebrating him. Colleagues whispered about the schedule, wine tastings, horseback rides, curated speeches about loyalty. One even joked, "It's less of a summit and more of a loyalty oath." Everyone laughed nervously, but no one dared to say it too loud. That was the culture. Now, smile, nod, obey. As I stood in the office that Friday, I knew my choice was already made. My sister's voice still echoed in my mind, fragile but pleading. She needed me more than he ever would. I typed out my response, short and clear: "I will not be attending. I have a family obligation that cannot wait." I pressed send. And for a moment, the air around me felt still, heavy, as if the walls themselves knew what was coming. A few coworkers glanced at me, eyes wide, like I had just broken a sacred rule. One of them muttered under her breath, "You know he won't like that." I didn't reply. I just closed my laptop, gathered my bag, and walked out into the Texas heat. The sun was blinding, but my chest felt strangely light. I had no idea how quickly that single decision would change everything. Because by Monday morning, the word family would take on a whole new meaning. Monday morning felt heavier than usual. The Austin air was thick, and as I walked through the glass doors of the office, I sensed something was off. Conversations hushed when I passed by. A few coworkers pretended to stay focused on their screens, but I could feel their eyes following me. At 9:15 sharp, my name lit up on the office intercom. "Please come to the executive conference room." The tone was flat, almost rehearsed. My chest tightened, but I kept my steps steady as I walked down the hall. Inside, the CEO was already waiting, his arms folded, flanked by two board members. He didn't waste a second. No greetings, no explanations. "You're not family here." The words echoed in the sterile room. Not family. I thought about the weekends I gave up, the nights I carried servers back to life while everyone else slept. I thought about the system I designed, the framework they still depended on every single day. But none of it mattered now. In their eyes, I was disposable. "Pack your things," he added, nodding toward the door. Two security guards stepped in, polite but firm. One held out a cardboard box as if this had been planned long before I entered the room. Walking back through the office, I felt the weight of silence. No one spoke. A few people glanced up, then quickly looked away. The sound of my own footsteps filled the space. I placed a framed photo and a few notebooks into the box, my hands moving slower than usual, as if dragging time itself. When the guards led me outside, the sunlight was blinding, hotter than it had been moments before. I clutched the box tighter, not out of fear, but out of a strange calm that was slowly settling in. Because deep down, I knew something they didn't, something that would turn this humiliation into their biggest mistake. I sat in the back seat of my car, the cardboard box beside me, staring at the reflection of the office tower in the rearview mirror. My hands were still trembling, not from fear anymore, but from the sharp humiliation of what had just happened, fired in front of everyone. Labeled an outsider, stripped of identity with one sentence. But as the heat of anger settled, a thought began to surface. A memory, something buried deep in the pages of our compliance documents, something I had drafted years ago when I built the system no one cared to understand. Clause 7F. I could still picture the night it was written. The lights dim in my office, a mug of cold coffee on my desk. Clause 7F was my safeguard, my silent shield. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't designed for attention. It was a simple line of defense buried in the infrastructure. If trust between the system and its architects was ever broken, access would shift into passive monitoring, not blocked, not sabotaged, just watchful waiting. I whispered the words to myself, trust revoked, monitoring enabled. And with that phrase, the panic that had been circling inside me began to fade. They thought they had cut me off. They thought by walking me out with a box, the story was over. But they never revoked what really mattered. I opened my laptop on the passenger seat, fingers hovering above the keys. I didn't need to interfere. Not yet. The system would move on its own. It would simply do what it was built to do, measure trust. And without me, it had every reason to start doubting them. The thought made me exhale slow and steady. For the first time that morning, I felt control returning, not in loud gestures, but in silence. And as I sat there in the Texas sun, I wondered how long would it take before they noticed the cracks. The first sign came almost too quietly, just a hiccup in the system, the kind of thing most people would brush off. A small spike in latency at the Austin data center. Nothing dramatic, just a few seconds of delay in transactions. By itself, it didn't look dangerous. A ticket was logged in Jira, marked minor performance issue. A junior engineer attached a screenshot, shrugged it off, and went back to his coffee. To them, it was background noise. To me, it was the first heartbeat of something much larger. I knew the system too well. Latency spikes weren't random, they were signals. Clause 7F had switched into passive mode, and that meant it was no longer granting unconditional trust. Every request, every validation was now being questioned. The system was cautious, suspicious. And when a system that big starts asking too many questions, it slows everything down. I could almost hear the CTO's voice in my head, dismissive and impatient. It's just a blip. Run a patch, reboot a cluster, it'll go away. That's what they always said. They never learned that small cracks aren't meant to be ignored, they're meant to be studied. As I scrolled through the error logs from my own device, I felt a strange calm. I wasn't touching anything. I didn't need to. The framework was working exactly as designed. It wasn't sabotage, it was consequence. By mid-morning, customer support had logged the first complaint, a payment taking twice as long to process, then another. Tiny annoyances easy to dismiss, but annoyance has a way of growing into panic once enough people feel it at the same time. I leaned back in my seat, closed my laptop, and whispered to myself, That's one. Because I knew this was just the beginning. And the next glitch would be impossible to ignore. At first, the glitches looked like scattered raindrops on a window. Small, isolated, easy to ignore. But by the second day, those drops started forming streams. The gift card validation system was the first to stumble. Customers tried to redeem codes and got stuck in endless loops. Some saw blank screens, others got double charges. The support team pushed out canned responses. "We're experiencing temporary delays. Thank you for your patience." But patience doesn't last long when money is involved. Then the analytics pipeline began to choke. Charts that once updated in real time now lagged by hours. Marketing teams who lived and died by those numbers panicked. Campaigns were running blind. Budgets burned with no feedback, like arrows shot into the dark. Inside the company, the mood shifted. Slack channels filled with half-baked theories. Maybe a server issue in Dallas, or could be a bad patch from last week. No one wanted to say the real fear out loud, that the foundation itself was shaking. I watched it unfold from a distance, scrolling through public complaints on Twitter, refreshing the system logs I still had cached. Each error was another drop in the bucket, slow but relentless. I didn't have to lift a finger. Clause 7F wasn't designed to destroy, it was designed to measure. And right now, it was measuring distrust, line by line, request by request. To the board, it probably still looked manageable. To the CTO, it was just growing pains. But I knew better. This wasn't a crash and burn disaster. This was a slow bleed, the kind that drains you without warning until you're too weak to stand. And the most dangerous part? They didn't even realize how fast they were losing blood. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the calm sink in. The system was patient, but patience never lasts forever. The next failure wouldn't just frustrate customers, it would humiliate the entire company. By midweek, the company declared a war room. That was their word for it. A makeshift command center inside the Austin headquarters where every senior engineer, manager, and executive crammed shoulder to shoulder. Screens lined the walls, glowing red with error logs and failing dashboards. I could imagine the atmosphere vividly, even though I wasn't there. The stale coffee, the sound of frantic typing, the CTO pacing back and forth, voices overlapping, frustration mounting. I had been in enough war rooms to know how quickly they devolve from strategy into chaos. They tried everything, rolling restarts, emergency patches, failover protocols, but each fix only created more problems. Two-factor authentication was the first to betray them. The recovery accounts were tied to credentials they had already revoked mine. That meant no one could properly reauthorize critical admin tools. Then the failover sequence misfired. Instead of balancing the load, it triggered a cascade of mismatches across the Texas cluster. One engineer shouted, "It's syncing to the wrong snapshot." Another yelled back, "Roll it back again." But rollback only deepened the split. What was once a single living organism had fractured into pieces that no longer trusted one another. Outside that glass room, customer complaints turned into headlines. Vendors threatened penalties. Clients demanded refunds. The so-called summit that was supposed to celebrate family first had become a stage for humiliation. From my apartment window, I could see the lights of the building glowing late into the night. I knew what that meant. Desperation had set in. And desperation breeds mistakes. I didn't need to interfere. I didn't need to push a button or flip a switch. Clause 7F was doing exactly what it was designed to do: observe, trust, and act when it was broken. And right now, their own hands were breaking it further with every frantic command. The war room wasn't a place of solutions anymore. It was a furnace burning through patience, money, and credibility. And soon, the fire would draw in someone far more dangerous than a panicked CTO. By Thursday morning, the technical chaos had spilled over into the legal department. When engineers can't fix a fire, lawyers are called in to figure out who should burn for it. I heard from a friend still inside that the general counsel, a sharp man named Reynolds, walked into the war room carrying a thick binder of compliance documents. He wasn't there to comfort anyone. He was there to read them their rights. Clause 7F wasn't just a footnote in the architecture. It had been formally reviewed, signed, and embedded in every compliance audit for years. On paper, it was crystal clear. If the systems architect was terminated without proper offboarding, the framework would automatically shift into passive monitoring mode. And once engaged, only the original architect could certify a new chain of trust. In other words, without me, their hands were tied. The CTO tried to argue, "It's just code. We can override it." But Reynolds shook his head and pointed to the audit log. The system had already reported itself silently sending canary signals to federal regulators, HIPAA, PCI, even state-level privacy watchdogs. Their compliance failures weren't hidden anymore. They were on record. The mood shifted from panic to dread. A technical failure could be patched, spun, explained away. A compliance violation? That was different. That was fines, lawsuits, investigations, headlines that no PR team could bury. I pictured their faces as the realization sank in. This wasn't just downtime. This was liability. And liability meant accountability, personal, financial, even criminal. For the first time, they weren't just fighting a system that didn't trust them. They were fighting the law itself, and the law didn't care about excuses. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and let the calm wash over me. They had chosen to erase me. But now they were the ones disappearing under the weight of their own signatures. And the worst part for them, the real reckoning hadn't even arrived yet. By Friday, the war room had gone quiet, not because the problems were solved, but because the weight of silence was heavier than shouting. My former coworkers were no longer arguing about patches or clusters. They were replaying my voice. Someone had dug up an old Loom recording. It was from months earlier, late at night, when I had warned them about the risks of skipping proper offboarding. I could still hear my own tired voice on the playback. This system doesn't forgive shortcuts. It runs on trust. Break that chain, and one day it won't listen to you anymore. According to the friend who told me, the room froze. Engineers who used to roll their eyes at my attention to detail were staring at their shoes. A young developer, the one who once asked me to walk him through the logging structure, reportedly put his hands over his face and whispered, "She told us. She literally told us this would happen." The guilt spread like smoke. Some people began whispering that the firing had been a mistake, that no one should have been treated like that for choosing family over a corporate party. But whispers couldn't undo signatures. They couldn't erase the audit trail now flooding the inboxes of regulators and vendors. I imagined the CFO's panic as insurance carriers refused coverage, citing negligence. I pictured the PR director staring at her draft statement, deleting line after line, realizing there was no spin that could hide the truth. And beneath all of it, I could feel the bitterness of the CEO himself, his perfect image cracking as the empire he paraded only a week earlier began collapsing under its own weight. For me, hearing about their regret didn't feel like triumph. It felt like inevitability. I had tried to warn them, and they had laughed. Now they were choking on the echo of my words. But regret was only the beginning, because someone with far more authority than the CEO was about to step into the room. That Friday afternoon, the tension inside headquarters finally cracked open. The boardroom doors swung wide, and in walked a man nobody expected, the founder himself. He had been quiet for years, retired from daily operations, content to let the new generation posture and preen. But the chaos had dragged him back. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard the details from someone who was. The entire room fell silent, as if oxygen had been pulled from the air. Executives who had been shouting minutes earlier straightened in their chairs. Even the CEO, the man who paraded around Austin like a king, shrank slightly when the founder took his seat at the head of the table. He didn't waste time. He looked up at the screens filled with red error logs and compliance alerts, then back at the faces around him. His voice was steady, calm, almost disappointed. "You've broken the spine of this company," he said. The CEO tried to speak, fumbling through excuses about unexpected technical issues. But the founder cut him off with one sentence that reportedly made the entire room go cold. "You fired the architect. She wasn't just part of the system, she was the system." No one argued after that, because it was true, and everyone in the room knew it. They had treated me like a replaceable cog, when in reality, I was the blueprint holding everything together. I imagined the silence that followed, the shame written across faces that once smirked at me in meetings. The founder didn't need to shout. His words carried more weight than any threat. And in that moment, the company's leadership understood the decision to cast me out had not just been cruel, it had been catastrophic. For the first time, they realized this disaster couldn't be solved with patches or lawyers. It would require something far more costly, and I knew they were about to come knocking. It didn't take long for the call to come, not from the CEO. He was too proud, too humiliated. It came from the founder himself. His voice was calm, almost too calm, when he said, "We need you back. Name your terms." For a moment, I just sat there in silence, letting the weight of those words sink in. A week earlier, I had been escorted out with a cardboard box like I was nothing. Now, the very people who erased me were admitting that without me, there was no company left to save. I didn't want their title, I didn't want their corner office, or their empty promises. What I wanted was clarity, so I gave them my answer: 9 figures. Not salary, not equity. A one-time recovery fee, 45 minutes of my time, paid upfront. There was a long pause on the line. I could almost hear the air leave the room on their end, as if they couldn't believe I had said it. Then the founder replied simply, "Done." When I arrived back at headquarters, they didn't escort me through the front doors this time. No security guards, no staged humiliation. Just a quiet walk into a sealed room where the failing systems waited for me. Screens flashed red, logs scrolled endlessly, the whole network on the edge of collapse. I sat down, rolled up my sleeves, and began. Minute 12, the first cluster came back online. Minute 23, transaction flows steadied. Minute 38, analytics finally synced. And at minute 45, the system's heartbeat returned to normal. No speeches, no applause. Just silence, because everyone in that room knew what it had cost them. I stood, closed my laptop, and said, "Your system is stable. Our deal is complete." And as I walked toward the door, I could feel every pair of eyes burning into my back. Eyes full of fear, regret, and something else. Because they all knew this was not a reconciliation. It was a transaction, and I wasn't staying. When the 45 minutes were over, I closed my laptop, stood up, and felt the entire room waiting for me to say something. The CEO avoided my eyes. The board sat frozen still, trying to process the number on the wire transfer they had just approved. And the founder, the only one who spoke with dignity, simply nodded. He understood that this wasn't forgiveness. It was a settlement. I walked past them without another word. No handshake, no hollow apologies, no attempt at reconciliation. My work there was finished. The system was alive again, but the trust between us was gone forever. As the glass doors slid open, the Texas sun hit my face, warm and blinding. For the first time in years, I felt light. No badge clipped to my shirt, no phone buzzing with after-hours emergencies, just silence and freedom. Behind me, I knew they would try to rebuild their image, spin headlines, convince the public everything was under control. But deep down, every single person in that building would remember this. They had fired the one person who had kept the backbone intact. And in the end, it cost them more than they could ever admit. What I carried with me wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. Sometimes walking away isn't defeat. Sometimes it's the loudest victory. Because when you know your worth, you don't need their validation. You don't need their titles. You only need the strength to say no and the courage to keep moving forward. So here's the truth I left with. Never let anyone convince you that loyalty means abandoning yourself. Real loyalty starts with protecting your values, your family, your peace. If you were in my shoes, would you have walked away too?